Chapter 1. Fragile Bonds, Unbreakable Will. Everything I remember about my early childhood comes from the small mud-floored house in Vuyyuru. We lived there with my maternal grandparents. It was the late 1980s, a time when electricity came and went like a passing thought, and the slow whirring of the ceiling fan felt like luxury. The floor was uneven and cool beneath my feet, from years of being swept and sprinkled with water to settle the dust. Mornings carried their own music and embrace. The smell of tamarind rice mixed with the smoke of firewood curling up from the kitchen, and the soft humming of my mother that woke me every morning, followed by the voices of chickens clucking somewhere outside my room's window, the faint call of neighbors across low mud walls, and the clear, steady sound of a temple bell at dawn that woke the town. I was breathing through the rhythm of daily sounds and the warmth of familiar hands of my mother and grandmother. When the power failed in the evenings, I could tell by the shift in the air, the sudden stillness, the quiet gasp from someone, and the faint rustle as lamps were lit. The room felt gentler then, as if even sound had lowered its voice. I often sat close to my grandmother during evenings, her sari smelling faintly of soap and turmeric. She narrated to me stories of gods and demons in a steady, lilting voice. My grandfather spoke less, but his voice was calm and firm like a drumbeat. His few words anchored me even when I couldn't yet understand their full meaning. He often said, "Never think about what you don't have. Think about what you can do with what you have." And when I hesitated or withdrew in silence, he would place his hand gently on my shoulder and say, "The world listens only to those who speak through their actions." Those words sank deeper than I realized then. Even today they echo within me, guiding me through uncertainties, reminding me to keep moving forward. He always took me along wherever he went, holding my hand firmly through crowds. With him, I felt seen, not for what I lacked, but for what I could become. We had simple meals, mostly rice with slurry dal, lentil soup that is a staple in every Indian household. Sometimes there was chutney, a vegetable dip, to make the food go down easier. Clothes were patched until there was barely any fabric left to patch. From what I vaguely recollect, life was not easy, yet I felt safe within those walls, protected by the warmth of my grandmother's presence and my mother's quiet determination. Every afternoon, my cousins pulled me into their games. Sometimes they treated me no differently, and at times they left me out in awkward silence. At that age, I only knew that something set me apart, yet I didn't know how deeply it ran. Blindness had touched my family long before it touched me. From my mother's side, it had been present for generations, an unspoken thread through our bloodline. It is a common practice in some communities of South India to marry cousins. They did not recognize that the shared lineage would one day shape the course of my life. Blindness in those days was considered not another way of living, but the end of living itself. Yet my parents refused to accept this fate. They chased every possibility of restoring my sight. They consulted Dr. Shiva Reddy, a renowned ophthalmologist of his time. After careful examination, he told them that nothing more could be done. Still, my parents did not stop trying. When I was 5, they took me to meet a Swamiji, a mystic who was believed to have miraculous healing powers. I remember the rattle of the train tracks, the smell of metal and steam, and my mother's anxious grip on my hand, as it was the first train journey of my life. But even there, nothing changed. They returned with heavy hearts but without regret. Their efforts were their way of fighting for me long before I had the strength to fight for myself. As I grew older, I often overheard whispers of my relatives while they thought I wasn't listening. This boy is blind. What future will he ever have? Those voices shaped my earliest memories, voices that defined what I could not be. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt the weight of their words. At that age, I had no answers but feelings. Feelings of confusion, isolation, and the ache of being judged. These were too big of emotions for a child to name. And yet somewhere deep inside, without knowing how or why, a spark began to grow. A quiet certainty that this would not be my story. But I didn't only grow up with the weight of blindness. I was battling two other worries as well. One was poverty, a constant factor pressed into every meal, every decision, every dream. The other was my father's drinking habits, unpredictable, heavy, and a concern always waiting at the door. He was trapped in a habit that stole his peace and ours. Back then, it shaped my childhood. Even today, the struggle remains the same. And I stand where my mother once stood, carrying the family financially, holding together what might otherwise fall apart. It was not just blindness I had to race against. It was circumstance. It was instability. It was everything that said our lives could only remain as they were. Home was not always peaceful. Some nights he came home quietly, ate his food and slept. Those were calm nights. But on other nights the smell of liquor arrived before he did. That was the warning of the storm to come. The first sign was the uneven thud of his footsteps. The door would slam open, vessels clattered. His voice rose louder. "Why isn't the food ready? What is this mess?" Even when the food had been waiting, the words still came. My mother never shouted back. She silently served food and took the blows as they came. I remember one night clearly, the sharp sound of his hand striking her cheek, a muffled cry, the crash of bangles scattering across the floor. I crouched in a corner, my hands over my ears. My grandmother pulled me close, whispering, "Nothing happened, Nani. It will pass." She always called me Nani, a Telugu word of affection for a child. But how could a child close his ears to the trouble inside his own home? The following morning, my mother rose as if nothing had happened. It was like any other day for her. I could hear the sound of utensils in the kitchen and the steady click-clack of her sewing machine that filled the room, the sound of her resilience. She stitched cloth bags until her fingers ached, her eyes heavy from sleepless nights. Each bag fetched only a few coins, but to me they meant much more. They were proof that she refused to give up, her will stitched into every seam. I often sat beside her, tracing the rough fabric with my fingers, listening to the rattle of the machine. To me, it was more than sound. It was a heartbeat, steady and unbroken, carrying us forward. I didn't know it then, but that was my first lesson in what strength truly sounds like. I didn't have many toys, but the few I had were treasures. 2 matchboxes tied with a string that became my telephone. A small mirror tilted to catch sunlight became my game. At that time, I could still see faint shades and light, and that moving patch of brightness fascinated me. I would sit for hours, tilting the mirror this way and that, watching the glow dancing across the wall. Those small interventions were my joys, and through them, I discovered that imagination could be richer than any shop-bought toy. Still, the reality around us was fragile. My parents' marriage was like a clay pot veined with cracks. It could break any day, yet it didn't. My mother never left, no matter how many times she was hurt. Perhaps it was love, perhaps duty, or perhaps that unbreakable vow to hold the family together. Whatever the reason, I knew one thing. No matter what happened, I could lean on her. In 1991, when I was 5, my paternal grandmother, Chayama, passed away. It was my first encounter with death. Death was a feeling I could not comprehend back then, but I could sense it in every sound and scent that filled our home. The wailing of women, the smell of camphor and incense, the hushed voices of adults speaking in grief, and the silence that remained after rituals. The house felt emptier, as if someone had demolished a strong pillar. I did not spend much time with her, but I knew Chayama was gentle and affectionate. She often told me about my father's childhood whenever we met. I still remember her voice, which was a beautiful blend of memory and laughter. I didn't understand her stories back then, but she made me feel safe, as though I belonged to something larger than myself. I didn't understand the meaning of forever, but I knew she was gone. Yet her presence remained, a soft echo in my earliest memories, teaching me before I could put my feelings into words. Amid grief, whispers, and hardships, life went on. To lift my mood, my mother sometimes took me to the cinema hall. The bright lights, the loud sounds, and the crowd, all of it overwhelmed me. I often cried, tugging at her hand, begging to go home. I don't know why, but the world outside felt harsher, louder, and less kind. All I ever wanted was to be in the comfort of my grandmother's lap. No matter how hard life pressed, my mother never loosened her hold on that vow. She kept it alive through her actions each day, through every stitch, every tear she hid, and every meal she made. Though I was too young to grasp the weight of her struggle, her willpower wrapped me like armor. By the time I turned 6, I had learned what was missing in my life. But I had also learned something greater. That real strength does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it moves with the rhythm of a sewing machine. And sometimes it hides in the quiet embrace of a mother who refuses to break. That was my lesson about resilience. Our lives were fragile, but my mother's will was unbreakable, and that made me more determined. And that quiet strength became the first promise I made to myself that I would find my way, no matter how dark it seemed.